Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm watching all the chats and all the people coming in, and very pleased with who has decided to join me today. Hopefully I won't disappoint with what I've got to tell you. I've decided to keep it quite light. I'm planning to publish the academic findings in journals later this year. And so I'm just going to crack on with it, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well to see how things go. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my exploration within wayfinding, and also it's moved much more towards way losing. Why do people get lost in and specifically in buildings is an area that I've always been interested by, and increasingly so with the research that I'm doing. And there's three angles to this talk. My academic journey to explore the question why people get lost, my design practice direction of it, angle on it, perspective on it, and also a personal perspective that is developing as we go along. So whether you want to call it, I call it wayfinding. Since joining the Royal Institute of Navigation, I've started to call it indoor navigation, human navigation, and there's scope for us to talk about that as we go forward. The other two words that we use, orientation, giving directions. But it basically has come from many years. I started designing signs in the 1990s, and I've probably designed thousands of signs and diagrams of buildings and maps. I'm starting to create online resources of it now. I've found all these lovely old examples of infographics, as I now call them, at work, and they're all geared around helping people find their way. And there's probably about 50 different places that I've looked at. And I co-wrote the NHS guidance 20 years ago, as was mentioned. And at that time, it was based on a year-long project, a research project, me wandering around, getting lost around lots and lots of hospitals, lots of other places that we thought had good sign systems. And we came away from it saying there's these three interrelated aspects to wayfinding, and it's influenced by the person, by the environment, and by the information. And like I say, that was in 1999. And I then went on to just design signs and feel like I was, I could call myself a wayfinding expert. And because these clients are paying us, I know there's people in the audience who do this job with me. I'm the co-chair of the Sign Design Society, which is an organisation for people who do just this. And I'm very proud of being part of that community. And so, for years, I've been designing these signs and saying, yeah, I know exactly why people are getting lost in your hospital or in your museum or in your arena, and that's what we're paid for. We're paid to be confident. We're paid to know that the entrance, have the theories behind it. My viewpoint changed really quite quickly and quite radically in 2009, when I, for various reasons, very sadly left applied wayfinding, where I'd been working for 2 years on city wayfinding projects, and as inclusive design director for the Legible London signs, which again, schemes that I'm so proud of. And I decided to join Birmingham City University. And the course that I teach on is graphic communication. And I absolutely thought that I would be teaching wayfinding, infographics, sign design, and I would be able to do a PhD really quickly, because I've written this book, so clearly it's going to be very easy to get a PhD out of this. And a few years later, should I say, so I have been since then, since 2009. Have been teaching graphic design, and I love it. It's very rewarding. There's a really diverse group, as you can imagine, in Birmingham. We have this really cool new building that opened about 3 or 4 years ago, Parkside, and we also have courses in Hong Kong. So we've been out to Hong Kong. I've been out to Hong Kong most years since starting, and for the last 4 years, I've been the link tutor for a course that we run, our exact course, but in Wuhan, China. And believe it or not, I was out there in November. Clearly, there was nothing wrong. But yeah, so we 23rd of January we started teaching online at this on this course in Wuhan, China. So I've had quite a lot of this online teaching, and I was on the crash courses of how to do it online, and I was one of the people going, close the borders, don't let people in, because all our English staff were coming straight back from Wuhan into England on the 23rd of January. So, you know, I've been involved in the lockdowns and so on for a while. So back to wayfinding. What I found, and I have found, and I'm increasingly looking back on what I'm learning, what I've done, what I've taught, is that wayfinding and navigation and sign design and map design is a very small part of what I teach. And I'm starting to explore why that is. I'm starting to explore what we need to be teaching, and who should teach it. You know, should I be teaching that? At what level should we be teaching it? What should we be teaching? Is it part of graphic design, signs, maps, and so on? But I absolutely know that it's equally part of architecture, or it's part of landscape architecture. It's also part of product design. The signs need to actually stay up. They need to be designed. You know, we've seen some fantastic innovations in wayfinding and navigation aids that are beautifully designed. And the one that I missed off there, which is unforgivable really, is app design. All the digitals, lots of you will come from that environment as well. So really sort of needing to start to explore how on earth we teach the parts of navigation that will help people find their way and stop getting lost in buildings. And it's something that I'm starting to explore now. And I'm interested to hear if anybody who's listening into this has any opinions on it, any ideas on it. Yeah, it would be great. So there's my email. I'll put that at the end as well. So back to, why do people get lost in buildings? And so I started my academic research probably in about 2010. So I'd been there about a year, survival mode of any new job. And then I decided, right, come on, I need to get on a PhD program. So I managed to get onto saying, right, I'm going to do something about wayfinding and then something about navigation. And by 2016, I was starting to find and explore places and discovered this world of navigation. So I'm very pleased to be talking to you all here now. And the RIN has just supported me and educated me as an academic researcher. I met my external examiner. I just spotted Ruth's on this call. Hello, Ruth. And I spoke at the INC, the International Navigation Conference, in 2017, 18 and 19. And what was really interesting to me was to see this world that I don't think many people know you exist, but, you know, outside of our world. But the fact that I was in this cognition and navigation stream session, which was really great. And I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. It's lots of animals and rats in mazes. And I'm going, signs, anybody? Signs? And actually, you know, it was funny to be up against quantum technology and left wanting. You know, they had a room full and we had a few. And the same the next year, you know, this cognition and navigation. We had some good people. It was a fantastic session, but we're up against resilient PNT. You know, how can we compete with that? But I think we can. I think we genuinely can. I think people like people, and people like cognition and thinking about how your brain works. And the way that I'm moving in my mind is, you know, that we're all reliant on people. But back to that conference. So this was my first introduction to the Royal Institute of Navigation. And hopefully some of you that I met on that first night in the Royal Pavilions, you do know how to have a good pre-dinner evening. It was fantastic. But I was late. I got lost getting there. I thought I knew where I was going. I assumed I knew the way. I know Brighton very well. I'm going to explain why in a moment. And I absolutely did not. It was not where I thought it was going to be. But what I did discover on that first night over Fizz was that there's such a diversity in navigation. Absolutely fascinating. So, you know, oh, what do you do? I used to navigate submarines, planes, warships, driverless vehicles. and then I would meet some animal navigation people who were exploring how bees navigate, and it was just fascinating. I thought, yeah, I want to be part of this world. And so I don't quite feel I fit, but I'm trying to just eke out a little corner of it for people like myself who are interested in the humans and the signs and the maps and the information, and that's definitely that navigator's side of it. And I think I came into my own when I was saying to people, I don't think we'd find lunch if we didn't have a sign at that key junction on the corridor. You'd have gone left instead of right. It was a 50-50 chance. And so definitely, I felt very welcome, and I still do. And I'm very, very proud to be part of the RIN. And I didn't get lost in Brighton generally because I'd been working on these wonderful sign systems. I'm not sure if anybody from Applied is here, but it's such a fantastic company. And these systems that we do that are map-based. And I've been paid for 15 more years to get lost in places. And Brighton was one of the cities that I got paid to get lost in. And I would just wander. And then I would go, why would I have gone left? Why would I not have gone right? And again, part of my research is going, well, is that a valid way of doing that? Did I need to ask many more people? We did ask people, but how many people make a viable number to ask? Somebody out there possibly has an opinion on that. So 2018, I sort of tried to blend in a bit, fit in, called it human navigation rather than wayfinding, and definitely started to define what I'm looking at as real world navigation rather than, so a lot of the research that is informing our knowledge is done on a screen. And I definitely believe there's something about the messiness of an environment, all the different information that we're bombarded with, the noises, the smells, the sounds, that make that theory different to what I'm trying to explore. But of course, as anybody who well knows who's involved in real world research, all the practitioners that are in on this seminar, it is messy, it is hard, it's hard to prove, but that doesn't stop us trying. Then in 2019, my last talk, I was sort of erring on both sides. I was talking about navigation, but also going back to wayfinding. I think there is a word that has a more humanistic aspect to it, and starting to ask the simple question, simplifying it right down, which was the title of my thesis: why do people get lost in buildings? And at 2019, I told the people that were listening about this, that I'd heard about 2 cases of people that had died by getting lost. And then we were always trying to find sort of the impact of getting lost. And this particular case came from me, the first one in Edinburgh came from me listening to a radio phone in Jeremy Vine saying, asking people to ring in if they'd ever got lost in a hospital. And I guess that's a question out to you. Has anybody got lost in a hospital? I think the chances are pretty high that you have. Think about why you got lost. Was it you? Was it the building? Or did you start your journey in the wrong place? And this is definitely where my heart is as far as my future guidance, and to revisit that wayfinding guidance that we did pre-digital, pre-Google Maps, RFID tags, pre all the technology, but also finding out what hospitals are planning to do. So I've got a project this year that I'm hoping is going to come off that'll have a digital slant to it, which I'm very excited to start exploring. And so what we've also found is, because this happened in December 2018, we've now had an inquest into Amanda's death. And so we can sort of look a little bit further into, was it really? Because obviously this is the headline from the day that she a couple of days later, she was lost, dies getting lost in this hospital. It's a little bit high end. And what the inquest found, and again, in my head, I'm going, was it the architecture? Was it the information? Was it the navigator? And this concept that she took a wrong turn. She really took a wrong turn. She ended up on the 3rd floor in the plant room. So this is the place where the baby was in the antenatal. You have to question what hospital thinks. Maybe it is just up one flight of stairs, and maybe she went up an extra flight. We'll never quite know exactly what, but you know, it's a massive place. The thought of having to navigate that when you are, you know, not feeling great, the idea of going to hospital is generally some sort of negative thing or worrisome thing or diagnostic thing. And it took them 7 hours to find her. Okay, this is just one building. So that has to raise questions about indoor search and rescue techniques. It has to raise questions about, you know, why they were searching outside. Why were they not just in? She's in her pajamas and a nightie or slippers. She's not going to have gone outside, not going to have gone far. So this sort of, you know, raises more questions than it answers. But one big part of it was the fact that what they found, what they actually know happened now, is that she died of a brain hemorrhage. So you could say, oh, she'd have died anyway. She was having headaches for days and weeks, and so she might have died. But you have to also think, well, surely that has played a factor. The fact that she was sitting in a plant room for 7 hours, that has to have affected it. And I'm desperate to go up to the hospital and have a look and all of that sort of stuff. And maybe I will. And the second one that I talked about, again, it's had its inquest, and this was a slightly different angle on exploring why somebody got lost and whether getting lost was actually the reason for them dying or whether it was something else. Now this one's a little bit more interesting in that Bernard Gore had gone to Westfield Shopping Centre. He was going to meet with his wife, and he wasn't found for 21 days. So the inquest found, you know, again, in my head, I'm thinking, is it the architecture? Is it the information? What is it that caused this? And I'm not trying to blame. I'm trying to say who could solve it. You know, it's all about solving these way-losing issues. You got trapped in this really unpleasant-looking fire exit. Can you imagine spending 3 weeks in that fire exit? And all I can think is that the door locked and there wasn't a handle on it, or he couldn't work out at the handle. And here's a massive thing. The police assumed that he hadn't actually got there. That's why they didn't bother looking. And then they assumed that he wouldn't be in this fire exit, so they didn't even look in it. Very strange, very odd, you know, lessons to be learnt. Again, indoor search and rescue, I think that's an interesting area for us to be exploring. There was suggestion that he had early stage dementia, and obviously one of the things, first symptoms of that is that you start to get lost initially in unfamiliar places, and then and he was unfamiliar with this shopping centre. But here's an interesting one, you know, about linked to the navigator and what's going on in their brain. You know, I think he was a very functioning person with mild dementia, from what I can tell. But my father would not want to bother anybody if he was lost. I think it's unlikely he'd approach a stranger for help. And so that's one of these things where we go, oh, you're just going to ask somebody for directions. Lots of people will not ask for directions, and they will not want to bother somebody. And they want, you know, so that again, sort of some of those assumptions that we as a group make as far as how people find their way. Oh, everybody likes to do that. And this is really important as well. This is taken from the report, the inquest report. Psychological, environmental and physiological stresses experienced as a result of being stuck inside the stairwell were possible significant contributors to his death. So suggesting that, you know, definitely the sort of stress of being, and again, understandable, we needed to make sure he doesn't get stuck, people don't get stuck in stairwells. So big question back to you, you know, have you ever got lost in a building? What caused it? Do you think you are normal? Do you think your response to it was normal? Do you think your response was like your teenage son, your 80-year-old mother, your neighbor who lives across the road, and starting to really explore, and then adding into that somebody who's visually impaired, somebody who's hearing impaired, somebody who can't walk far, somebody. So there's all these sort of other aspects of who the navigator is, as well as what the building layout is like, as well as how we've designed the signs. So one of the parts of my study was I took quite a simple approach initially to grab some data, and then it got slightly more complex. But, you know, this very first stage of I'm just going to do a questionnaire, I'm just going to see what people say, and just some really interesting responses back from when I asked people just to recall a time. What did you do? Where were you? What happened? Why did you get lost? How did you feel? Did something disorientate you or orientate you after? And what did you do to find your way back? So there were sort of 5 different aspects of that: the emotional response, the causes of why they got lost, what they did, so their wayfinding strategy, and then and so from this sort of grabbing of some information that was sort of very, very done in a good way, in a solid way, but I was able to analyze those and found that 100 had got lost, recalled getting lost in an outdoor environment, but 50 of them, so a third of them had got lost in an indoor environment. Now, bearing in mind, a lot of the people I asked were either at a conference or within the student. They were obviously then remembering when they got lost at the university. But that's the big thing. We have every year massive influx of new people. They all are unfamiliar. Many have disabilities. And, we need to be starting to make sure that our university buildings are something you can find your way around. And so, big part was university, big part was hospital, big part shopping centre, big part transport hub, and other ones was a school. Now, here's one interesting finding I had. My daughter, when she started secondary school, number one worry of children who are, I get what age is that, 10 going up to 10 years old, was getting lost in school, in the secondary school. They had visions of these massive secondary schools and they were going to get lost. So really interesting angle on this question as well. At a lower level, what will a 10-year-old see, do, remember? And in fact, one of the students that I interviewed for my study remembered a wayfinding system in her school that was colour coding of these 4 different areas. All the signs, all the doors were all the colour, and she still remembered that. So 10 years on. So it was really interesting. So what I've also done is analysed what strategies they did. So what did they do after they wayfound? 66% involved other people. So what people recalled doing was looking for anyone to ask for directions. And looking for somebody official to ask for directions. Now, you might think they're the same. They're not. If you ask anybody, the chances of you getting good, clear directions that are true and correct and, are 50-50 probably. I don't know. Somebody out there might have a theory behind that, but with the third of the people are just going to generally ask anybody. My mother-in-law would definitely just ask anybody. And so that sort of a people-orientated strategy is something that we like people. Now, obviously, that has changed massively this last year. We've all got masks on. People aren't going out. People don't want you getting near to them. People aren't going up to people. There aren't people hanging around. There aren't people stood in environments. So that number of people to ask for directions has significantly reduced. That whole strategy, this whole finding, I can start looking at again what you're going to do this time. Other things that people recall doing, they phoned somebody to ask for directions. So again, it's a people related, but on their phone. They stopped and walked to be stopped and waited to be found. Now that was just a couple of people talked about that, and that started again triggering me to say, I think there's different types of people, as in personalities. Those that will ask somebody, the Bernard Gores of the world, who won't ask, that's not their nature, and the people that just are passively stood there waiting to be found. And those people that are quite actively, reactively going, I'm lost, I'll ring somebody. Raises all sorts of interesting questions. Some people will look for a sign. Some people will look for a map. These are sort of information orientated people. I would probably do that. But increasingly, on my Google Maps, on my phone, more than something on a wall. So again, there's been this change in behavior and it's evolving and it's carrying on. And I think we're all going to see the implications of that. Certainly the not touching things. So the touch screen devices that are all in play, we're going to have to think about that. And then the other few people were looking for feature or a landmark that they recognized. And this is one that I do. There was only a couple that said they retrace their steps. They go back the way they came. I use that all the time. I just start again. I was like, oh, it's like the refresh button. Let's start again. Let's try and work this out. So retracing your steps is one that I use a lot because I am really, really bad at finding my way. That's, I think, is why I'm interested by this. They always say, do your research about something you're passionate about. I am genuinely passionate about this. So further analysis. So I obviously got my data and started to look at so comments that they make on their responses. I had never been to the building before, so this idea that it's unfamiliar and that's why they have no memory of it because they've never been there before. So it sort of shifts into sort of memory and so on. There were no signs. I was chatting and not paying attention. That's massive. That was one, this idea of distraction and that you're not paying attention. And another one, I'm not sure if it's here, is that I assumed I knew where I was going. So these assumptions that you know where you're going. And again, it's really key about the navigator. What are you likely to do? So some really interesting comments that then I could then sort of create these factors of the familiarity or unfamiliarity, the level of distraction, the expectations, and that they took a wrong turn. And that whole thing of taking a wrong turn is massive. Because obviously you take this turn, you take a wrong turn, and then you just sort of you're then on the wrong track. And if you confidently, oh no, I'm not wrong, and a good friend of mine says, oh, I've never been lost, and I'm like, okay, maybe not, I don't know. I would love to know if any of you would say, no, I've never been lost. And question, you might say with your scientific minds, well, what is lost? What do you mean by lost? Whole another conversation. So I analysed. So another aspect of this, and Ruth said that this was really my external examiner was saying I really need to sort of be exploring this and sharing this part of the study. And it came from people saying, oh, how did I feel? I felt really anxious. So I gathered all of those descriptors that they used and plotted them against this sort of quite an established model called the circumplex model of emotion, the things there, and sort of plotted the words that they were using. And you can see there most of them are negative, and on the top end, pretty unpleasant and enhance your bodily changes and clearly cognition. And so the idea that the getting lost is not going to be exciting and funny and be curious and I'm not going to be bothered and I'm going to be okay. I'm actually likely to not be feeling pretty good. And the implications of this are massive as far as branded environments about going into a shopping centre and then you get lost and you're feeling terrified or scared or panicked. You're not going to, I'll just go and buy some shoes. And the same with the airports. The airports are all about you being calm and relaxed and good enough to shop, because we all know you go to an airport to shop. You don't go there to get a plane. That's your secondary in the world of airports. Anybody that's done that, I might be speaking out of turn. That might have changed. But certainly when I was doing the wayfinding projects at Heathrow, Terminal 3, really lovely project. And no, you can't put your sign there. That's an advertising sign. And you got a place and you go, okay. So there was this multi-stage mixed method study that it took me years, literally, and was building up, and I was trying to work out what I was trying to say. And of course, I produced a thesis. Thank you. Big thesis, and like many of you have done as well. But it had these three different categories. It had one element that was looking at why people get lost, what way, and I needed a term, and I've used this term waylosing. I don't know if it'll catch on or not. I don't know if other people need it. But for the purpose of this study, I needed a word that talked about, you're not lost, you're finding your way, but you've lost your way in some way. And then I was talking about wayfinding, so actually following signs, maps, the building, seeing how you find your way, what strategies. And then also a need for something. So a while ago, there's a book called Way Showing by Per Mollerup, and Per Mollerup's a great friend. I got a lot of time for his theory. I think there's something very good about this concept that he's come up with, way showing. So his theory is that wayfinding is you finding your way. That's an action. That's a thing that we do. You can't be a wayfinding designer. That's like two different things. You need to be what his theory is that we're showing you the way through signs and maps and whatever other devices we've created, aids. And it hasn't caught on. And when I asked practitioners that I interviewed, going, why don't you use that word? I'm sort of feeling I like it sort of, but it's a little bit proactive. It's a bit sort of going show. I'm going to show you how to do it. So again, I needed a word that was more guiding. It's gentler. It's more sort of in that way. So I used those three terms to sort of create these three aspects of the study. And part of it was me asking sign designers what they expected people to do. Because what I'm interested in doing is trying to apply my theory to the design practices that I know and love and that I plan to carry on doing. And so I found 50 sign designers from the Sign Design Society and also our American equivalent, the Society of Environmental Graphic Designs. Now, they're sort of David and Goliath. Sign Design Society, which I'm the co-chair, we have 100-ish members. It's a really lovely little community. Please do join us. You can get access to all our talks. And then there's also the Society of Environmental Graphics. It's enormous. We had the chief exec talk to us recently, and it's just they've got people and webinars and because of course America's huge. And so I had 50 questionnaires, about 25 from each, and they base their solution. What they were talking about, how do you come up with your solutions? Like I started by saying, I'm an expert. I know exactly why people get lost. I'm now questioning that as a researcher, as having spent time with the scientists amongst you that do your research in a very much different, very rigorous, prove it, control it. What's the variables? Really thinking along those lines. We tend to, there's a time limit. Time is money. We have to solve these problems. And so we tend to base it on observation and behavior. And I've started talking to architects about how they design their buildings. And of course, they're basing it on, we know how to do it. So again, there's this sort of mismatch between designers and scientists, which certainly is at the underpinning of Kate's setting up the cognition and navigation special interest group at RIN, which we're planning some sort of seminar that's exploring that connection between scientists and theory and psychology and so on. So you'll hear more about that soon when we get that into place. And here's a really interesting finding. I didn't think anything much more of it initially, but so the sign designers, so these 50 sign designers, I asked if they had a good or an excellent sense of direction versus a poor or a very poor. And 92% said they had a good or excellent sense of direction. And again, you might be saying, well, what do you mean by that? And there's studies on it. I'm not convinced about the ones where you have to point in the direction and that determines the sense of direction. But maybe I just don't get the sort of the theory behind that. But, I think we all know. Do you have a good sense of direction? Do you generally get lost? Do you generally know where you are? I have a terrible sense of direction. I wouldn't say it's very poor. I'd say it's poor. So this, again, was a real surprise, seeing how many of these people that are solving way-losing problems, trying to understand why people get lost, but actually they're not that person because they've got a really good sense of direction. They'll know that that's where the entrance is because that's where they came in. So there's a really interesting conversation to be had there as to whether one of my interviews talked about the curse of the expert. And I think a lot of us here today will have that and will be familiar with that. Whereas we're 5 steps ahead. If I look at a sign, I'm looking how it's attached, if it's in the right place, if it's consistent with all the others, if it's illuminated, if it's not, what's it made out of, if I like the typography, what's the type size, is it big enough? So I'm asking all these questions when I look at a sign. Of course, my family now does that, but people that have never thought about signs aren't going to be thinking in that way. So really important that we start to realize that if we're an expert in something, we've really thought it through, then we're probably not the best people to be solving the problems or coming up with the solutions in a final way. So as everybody and anybody who's done a PhD will know, it is humbling. It makes you think you don't know anything. It makes you question whether you've actually got anything valid to say. You go around in a million circles and eventually you come up with something that you go, oh, hopefully that's good enough. And now I'm starting to really try and hone in on where I should be publishing the theories I've come up with, who I should be next collaborating with, and it's really exciting. And and that question, can somebody who's got a really good sense of direction, or can a navigator then be designing, and the training that navigators in your world go into? Very interesting. And then I said there was a personal aspect of this as well, and I mentioned this at the last conference, and obviously things have got even worse now. We're in COVID, but actually they've got better for us. So my mum got diagnosed with Alzheimer's a couple of years ago, so I was mindful that my research was actually quite pertinent. Her symptom, her reason why we got her tested was she went to where my sister lives, which is 20 minutes down the road, parked her car, forgot why she was there, forgot where my sister lived, and forgot where she put, and forgot why she was, forgot where she parked the car. So sort of half a day later, she's and actually she did ask somebody. She said, do you know where this is? And we got her home. But really interesting, that whole, quite quickly it's gone from her driving around doing everything herself to no, she needs to get taken. And that is a very different, that divide, how long that was before she did something and it affected everybody. She probably was doing that for quite a significant time before then. And the fact that she got no mobile phone, so any of the digital solutions are absolutely no use to my mum at all. And again, as she wouldn't have used a mobile phone in those days. So there's a real sort of sense, and certainly Ramadi Passini from America, who did a lot of the early wayfinding, and he's got some great books. His research shifted into people with Alzheimer's or dementia, and I guess that's where some of the funding is. But I'm interested in all sorts of environments. I'm interested in how we can make a link between the theory I've now researched and many of you know about, and how we make it so that you will find your way. And obviously some places are really simple. There's only one staircase, but that staircase is absolutely no use to somebody who's in a wheelchair, got a broken leg, feeling tired, and so having all those alternatives in a real life situation are really quite complex. And I love solving complex problems. So, it's not a problem, but I think coming up with a theory for very complex problem solving is quite a challenge. And so right early on, you saw in the wayfinding guide that we did for the NHS, we identified these sort of 3 interlinked areas of issues, I guess, impact, influence, whatever you want to call them, that really affect whether you actually find where you want to go or where you need to go. And what I'm starting to think now is, obviously we have the information, and this can be remedied through graphic design, information design, wayfinding design, product design, and also the environment, architects, interior designers, landscape architects, and so on. And obviously digital as well is somewhere within this, solving these problems. But how do we actually solve the fact that the navigator has very, very varied abilities and cognition and thoughts? And I was trying to, this really interested me, this concept of navigation, of the cognition of the navigators. What are they thinking? How can we start to factor that into what will cause people to get lost? And so I've come up with so having looked at everything, and I've got loads and loads, I'm going to sort of share it in some sort of linear way for those of you who need it in that way. But this is where I've ended up. This is called the Magpie Model, and it stands for MAGPIE. So the PIE is the people, the information, the environment, and the idea that people will follow and will give directions. People will have signs, will have spoken directions, will have building, but you've also got this the memory, but it's the memorability of a space, of the name, of the information that we give, and it's the memories of the people, and it's the memorability of the long-term or short-term memory of the person that's trying to find. So there's all these sort of intertwined things within just this one factor that influences whether you're going to get lost or not. This, my mum's in this, obviously her memory is a key part of that. The attention, both whether the sign catches my attention or the information or the digital or whatever it is, the information that I give you has to be attention grabbing. So that, as a sign designer, we know if you put a white sign on a white wall with light grey type, it's going to blend in. Hotels, you love it. Architects love it. Signs that blend in. But it's going to be really hard to follow, you know, or see. And similarly, the person needs to be paying attention. So there's an element of the person and their attention to the route that they're following. And, you know, I get distracted really easily, especially when I'm shopping or if I'm in a museum. But I'm very, very attentive when I'm in an airport trying to find the gate, you know. So there's different things. And that leads on to the next one, which is the goal. So the reason why you're in the building affects your mental state. It affects how much attention you're paying to wayfinding and navigation, but it also, you know, affects how hard it is to find the destination. So we had a brilliant talk from David Gibson at the Sign Design Society last week, and he talked about the route through an airport, for example, and that it has been quite straightforward. I imagine anybody who's traveling now, it's got a little bit more complicated, and there's a plethora of tiny little signs and arrows on the floor, and you know, your goal has gone, so you have to go for COVID testing, and then you have to go to the quarantine hotel, and then you have to go for there, and that goal. And I would be very stressed if I was traveling you know, internationally at the moment. And then these three factors which still affect that. So I've drawn this in many different ways, and I just really will be telling people. So what I'm doing at the moment is going to design agencies that I know of. So Maynard, City ID, Applied Wayfinding. So these are companies that I've worked with that do wayfinding projects. And I'm asking them about this theory and how we then map that against the navigator, the designer, and how we then start measuring whether that theory will be of any use at all. So I wasn't sure what to talk about today. I just thought I would keep it slightly lighter, and I know the audience is very varied, so I'm very, very happy to answer any questions. If you want to see any more of the sort of diagrams from this study, I have got another presentation I can just flash up. But, you know, like I say, I will be publishing that later this year. So thank you. Thank you very much.